In the heart of a land where dust walked before the wind, where drums echoed across hills like thunder trapped in wood, sat the village of Mbalua, ancient, stubborn, and steeped in belief. The villagers spoke in hushed tones when night fell, for the land remembered things people tried to forget. And above all else, Mbalua feared one thing more than drought, more than war, more than spirits that howled in trees. Mbalua feared twins. To them, a twin birth was not a blessing but a test, a trembling sign from the gods that the border between life and death had thinned, and someone had to be given back. It was said that no womb could carry two lives without inviting the dead to claim one. One twin would bring light, luck, and a full harvest. The other would open the door to misfortune, disease, or death. And so, whenever twins were born, the elders gathered, stones in hand and chants on tongue, to decide which child would live and which would return. It was during the blood eclipse, the sky bleeding red, the sun swallowed whole, that the cries rang out from the midwife's hut. The mother, barely more than a girl herself, screamed as if the earth was tearing through her. Inside the dark hut, lit by fireflies and clay jars, the midwife's hands trembled as she reached between trembling thighs slick with blood and fear. Two babies came forth, slippery and silent. The first one, a girl, gasped, loud and defiant, fists curled, breath stolen from the night. The second lay still. Pale lips. Closed eyes. A hand that brushed her sister's but did not grip it. The elder was named Nyasha, Hope. The stillborn one, too perfect to burn or cast into the wild, was named Nuru, Light. She was wrapped in bark cloth laced with herbs and chants, her tiny eyes pressed shut with ashen tears. They dug a grave beneath the twisted fig tree, where the soil was thick with history, and laid her in silence. But the soil would not keep her. Night after night, the grave was found disturbed. Shallow. Unsettled. The clay markers broken. The animals, jackals, perhaps, or spirits in disguise, had returned again and again, as if the earth itself had spat the child out. The elders grew nervous. The villagers stopped walking past the fig tree after sunset. The midwife aged quickly, her eyes hollow with things she couldn't explain. Finally, they made a decision whispered through clenched jaws. The corpse was exhumed, its skin eerily untouched by decay. The body was sealed in a sacred clay jar, painted with black symbols no one had drawn in generations, death seals, used for beings who refused to rest. The jar was taken to the inner shrine, buried beneath the altar stones, and covered in silence. No name was spoken. No ritual was finished. Only one truth remained: twins had been born that night, but only one had stayed, and even that, some feared, was temporary. 17 seasons passed, and Nyasha grew like a shadow under the sun, always there, but never quite one with the light. From the outside, she was a normal girl, almond skin kissed by the hills, hair coiled like twisted vines, and eyes too wide, too knowing. But the villagers of Mbalua never forgot the blood eclipse, nor the twin that hadn't stayed buried. They watched Nyasha from corners, spoke behind her back, and whispered names she pretended not to hear: half-girl, spirit-born, the cursed one. Nyasha knew she was different. Not just because the children avoided her during games or because her uncle, the man who raised her but never called her daughter, only spoke to her in grunts. It was something deeper. A silence that trailed her like breath. She would look into a bowl of water and see herself, and something else. Sometimes, her reflection would blink when she hadn't. Sometimes, it smiled after her mouth had gone still. The dreams began at 13. Always the same. She floated in dark water, heavy as stone, her limbs limp but her chest tight with fear. Across the water's black mirror, a figure would appear, a girl with her face, her hair, her everything, except the eyes. Those eyes glowed like buried fire, and when the twin reached for her, Nyasha felt her lungs fill with water. She'd wake choking, soaked with sweat, clawing at her throat. Mama Oko, the blind herbalist who lived just outside the village rim, would say, "Your spirit is remembering. The dead have long arms when they are forgotten." Mama Oko was the only one who didn't flinch from Nyasha's presence. The old woman, blind but always seeming to know who stood where and why, welcomed Nyasha with warm broth and riddles. She would place herbs in Nyasha's hands and say, "Feel their song." Spirits speak in smells before words. But even Mama Oko grew quiet whenever Nyasha asked about her birth, or about her twin. The most she ever said was, "The earth keeps what it's owed. Unless you owe it more." Strange things began happening. Chickens fled when Nyasha came near, flapping wildly as if escaping an unseen hand. Dogs barked at her shadow, then whimpered and hid under huts. At the well, the water would ripple before she touched it, moving in circles with no wind. The worst was the mirrors. The one in her uncle's home cracked in the middle while she brushed her hair. Another, gifted to her during a harvest feast, shattered into 7 pieces the moment she caught her own eye. The village children told stories about her now, about a girl whose sister came out of the grave to follow her, step by step, waiting for her turn to live. The boys mimicked her voice in the night and threw stones at her path. The girls pulled away from her hand during dances, eyes wide with inherited fear. Her uncle, who once tried to teach her how to till the soil, now avoided her gaze altogether. "It's best you stay quiet," he muttered one evening, eyes locked on the fire. "Don't stir things that should have been settled long ago." But the stirring came anyway. The coming-of-age ceremony for the village girls arrived with full moonlight and drums. A night of beauty, of pride, when the girls stepped barefoot into the river and returned draped in beads, marking their passage into womanhood. The elders watched. The mothers wept with joy. When it was Nyasha's turn, she walked into the water like the others, chin high, heart pounding. The river was cold, and something beneath her feet pulsed like a second heartbeat. When she stepped out, the matron came forward with white cloth and pressed it between her legs, as tradition dictated. All the girls before her had stained the cloth with bright crimson, the sign of purity and readiness. But when the cloth was removed from Nyasha, it was slick with something else. Black. Thick and ink dark, like the blood of a thing that had never lived. A gasp rippled through the women. Someone dropped their gourd. An elder backed away, covering his mouth. Even the drums stopped. The matron stared at the cloth, then at Nyasha, then whispered, "She bleeds with the grave." Before the ceremony could be finished, the elders gathered. All 9 of them, dressed in ancestral robes, their eyes heavy with fear disguised as wisdom. They sent for her uncle, for Mama Oko, for the spirit keeper. That night, fires were lit high and did not go out until dawn. Nyasha sat alone in the hut where she'd been told to wait. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her body felt strange, both hers and not hers. She could still feel the cold of the water, but also the touch of unseen fingers brushing her cheek. Somewhere outside, an owl cried 3 times, a sign of death walking. And then, the old matron entered the hut. "They've decided," she said, not meeting Nyasha's eyes. "The curse of the twin still lives. A ritual must be done, before the wrong soul finds its way back." Nyasha's lips parted, but no sound came. Outside, the villagers had already begun to dig. The sky wept gray the morning they opened the shrine. A hush settled over Mbulua, thick and unnatural, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. No birds sang. No fires crackled. Even the wind slithered around the edges of the village, unwilling to pass through. Only the drums spoke, slow, deep, mournful, echoing like footsteps from another world. The shrine sat at the highest point of the village, carved into the side of a red stone hill that the elders called Ngomya Mizumu, Fortress of Spirits. No child dared climb it. Only the spirit keeper and the 9 elders carried the keys to the thick wooden door sealed with ochre and ash. That morning, all 9 came, their white robes dragging over the dust, faces painted with ash and grief. Nyasha stood beside them, her wrists bound with palm rope, her bare feet coated in the red soil that stuck like shame. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. There was a silence in her now that had settled deep into her chest. Behind her, the villagers stood in clusters, watching like stone, mothers clutching children close, the men with machetes across their shoulders, as if expecting the dead to leap from the earth. The spirit keeper, a gaunt man with skin drawn tight over his bones, stepped forward. His fingers moved over the sacred locks, drawing symbols in the air with white chalk, whispering words that cracked in the wind. One by one, the locks opened with groans like thunder and old bones. The door creaked open. Inside, darkness breathed. Thick and old. The air smelled of old rain, salt, and something deeper, a sweetness gone sour, like fruit left to rot in the sun. At the center of the chamber sat the clay jar, taller than a man's chest and covered in dark sigils no one dared translate aloud. A sharp gasp escaped from someone in the crowd. The jar wasn't dusty. It looked as if it had just been placed there. Wet, almost. Breathing. The spirit keeper began to chant, his voice rising in tone, the words curving like fire smoke around the elders. Together they circled the jar, their staffs pounding the floor in rhythm. The air thickened. The ground trembled. And then, crack. A hairline fracture split the jar's lid. Another crack, deeper. The third made the jar exhale, a long, wet sound, like lungs that had waited too long to be filled. The lid fell aside. And out slid the corpse of Nuru. The girl had been dead for 17 years. But she hadn't changed. Her skin was smooth and taut, her lips gently closed, her eyes, closed, but restless, twitching behind lids like she was dreaming. Her limbs folded neatly, as if someone had posed her carefully before sealing her fate. Her long hair, identical to Nyasha's, had curled into a halo around her small head. A wail tore through the silence. Nyasha flinched, not from the body, but from the sound her uncle made. A kind of grief no man should ever be forced to release. He covered his face and turned away. Moja Aki. Moja Arudi. The elders began the chant, one must stay, one must return. Over and over, their voices rising like fire beneath drums. Mama Oko stood apart from the crowd, arms crossed over her chest, her mouth unmoving. She did not join them. She simply listened. Nyasha was led to the center. Her eyes locked onto the corpse. Her knees nearly buckled. But she walked. They placed her beside her sister, side by side, face to face. Nuru's skin was cold, so cold it stung. A sting that felt personal. The ropes came out. The elders wrapped Nyasha's right hand to Nuru's left, their fingers overlapping like woven roots. Then the other hand. Tight knots. No escape. Sacred herbs were burned. Ash rubbed on their foreheads. Red dust drawn in circles around them. The night will choose, said the spirit keeper. By dawn, one will belong. The other will be known. They carried the twins, one breathing, one not, to the burial hut. The same one where dead chiefs were prepared. No one had entered it in a decade. Cobwebs greeted them. Shadows clung to the walls like jealous siblings. The door slammed shut. A long strip of bark covered in elder blood was nailed across it. The seal of silence. No one would open it until the sun touched the shrine again. Inside, Nyasha sat with her knees drawn to her chest, the corpse of Nuru lying beside her like a mirror abandoned by its reflection. Her heart beat too loud. Her mouth was dry. The smell of the herbs made her dizzy. She tried to sleep, but every time her eyes fluttered shut, she felt the cold arm brush hers. Why now? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why come for me now? The corpse said nothing. But Nyasha could feel it. The tension in the air. The way the shadows didn't behave. She leaned her head back and stared at the thatched roof above her, blinking slow. The ropes burned her wrists. Time moved strangely. The hut pulsed like a lung. She must have dozed off, because suddenly, she was cold. Very cold. Her teeth chattered. Her breath fogged. She turned slowly toward her sister's body. The eyes were open. Wide. Dark. Empty. But open. Nyasha tried to scream, but her voice caught. Her arms twitched, but the ropes held. She began to tremble violently, the cold seeping into her bones, into her blood. The corpse shifted. Not much. Just a twitch of the finger. A movement so subtle it could have been imagined. Nyasha's heart pounded. Her vision blurred. Her chest ached, heavy with fear. Then, silence. Her breath stopped. She tried to inhale, but her body didn't obey. Panic bloomed, but her limbs wouldn't flinch. No ear. No sound. Her head lolled. Her mouth parted. No breath. Stillness. Then, a faint hiss. From the corpse's lips. A whisper of air. A breath. Not Nyasha's. Nuru's. ChatGPT said. At sunrise, the burial hut groaned. The bark seal cracked, curling at the edges like a leaf in flame. The villagers gathered silently, hearts clenching, eyes darting toward the shrine's jagged silhouette against the orange sky. No one spoke. Not even the spirit keeper, whose breath had gone shallow sometime after midnight. He simply raised a hand, signaling the elders, and together they moved toward the door as though approaching something that had teeth. They opened it. The air that spilled out was still and cold, as if it had never belonged to the world outside. Smoke from the herbs still lingered, thick and sour. And then she emerged, slowly, carefully, like someone returning from a long walk through water. The girl who stepped into the light wore Nyasha's face. Her skin was the same rich brown, her cheeks soft, her lips gently parted. Her eyes, however, they were wrong. Not in color or shape, but in something deeper, something beneath the surface, like glass over a storm. She blinked slowly at the crowd, then offered a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. I am Nyasha, she said. Her voice was soft, steady. But it was not hers. Not the voice that used to crack when she was nervous. Not the voice that sang softly to herself when no one was listening. This voice sounded like two people speaking at once, one calm, one whispering from far away. Mama Oko stepped forward, leaning heavily on her staff. Her blind eyes turned toward the girl with uncanny precision. You breathe like her, Mama Oko said, tilting her head, but you move like something learning to wear skin. The girl looked at her, long, unblinking, then tilted her head in the same direction. I was always meant to walk, she said. This body only needed a little silence. People stared. The ropes were gone. Untied, not broken. Placed neatly by the doorway, as if removed by hands that respected them. Nyasha's hands. Or Nuru's. Whispers hissed through the crowd. The spirit keeper dropped to one knee, murmuring old prayers. Children clung to their mothers. A chicken, tethered to a post nearby, began to screech and thrash so violently it snapped its own neck. The air turned heavy again, pressing against everyone's skin like wet cloth. That evening, the girl returned to her uncle's home. He said nothing, just opened the door and let her pass. She moved through the house like she was rediscovering it, trailing her fingers along the walls, inhaling the scents, touching objects like they might break or speak. When night came, she didn't light a lamp. She sat in the dark. And she smiled. The next morning, the village noticed things. First, the well water turned sour. Not poisoned, just wrong. Like it had forgotten how to be clean. Then the goats refused to eat. One by one, they pressed themselves against the fences, refusing to meet human eyes, heads tilted toward the east. When a young boy tried to lead a cow through the village square, the animal reared back and tore free, vanishing into the woods and never returning. Nyasha, or the girl who called herself that, seemed unaffected. She walked through the market barefoot, even though the dust now carried thorns. She greeted people by name, even ones she'd never spoken to before. Her laughter, once light and quiet, had turned sharp, echoing in strange ways. Some swore it came from two mouths. Children stopped looking her in the eyes. One girl cried for an hour after brushing shoulders with her. Another boy, barely 6, whispered to his mother, that girl's shadow isn't hers. Mama Oko tried to visit her. She knocked at the door just before sunset, her wrinkled hand resting on her staff. Child, she called gently. You have come back, but I do not think you brought yourself with you. Silence. Then the door creaked open. The girl stood there, eyes glassy, hair loose and wild around her face. She stared at the old woman for a long time before stepping aside. Mama Oko entered. The house was colder than it should have been. Ash on the floor. A mirror turned to face the wall. They sat across from each other, neither speaking for a while. I fed you when your uncle would not, Mama Oko finally said. I wrapped your bleeding feet when the village children made you walk over thorns. I taught you the names of leaves and the way wind sings before the dead arrive. The girl said nothing. You are not Nyasha. That made the girl smile. I am her. I am more than her. I am what was always buried. Mama Oko sighed and stood. Then we have no more to talk about, corpse child. That night, the old woman smeared red chalk around her own hut, whispering names that hadn't been spoken in decades. By the next moon, things got worse. The maize in the fields turned gray before it ripened. Chickens laid no eggs. 3 women miscarried in the same week. And when a hunter returned with a monkey he'd trapped near the river, he found it dead in his satchel, but its body cold and swollen, as if it had drowned. Still, the girl lived as if untouched. She wandered through the village at odd hours. Once, she was found standing in the rain, smiling at the sky with her palms turned up like someone waiting to be chosen again. Another time, she sat by the ancestral tree, singing in a language even Mama Oko didn't recognize, a lullaby full of long vowels and weeping tones. Then came the mirror. It hung in the main hut, used only during blessings or wedding rites. Nyasha stood before it, alone, just before dawn. Her uncle had stepped out to fetch water, and when he returned, he found her motionless in front of it, her breath fogging the surface. He called her name. She didn't turn. He moved closer and froze. In the mirror, her face was there, as expected, but behind her reflection stood another girl. Same face. Same hair. But her eyes bled dark tears, her mouth wide in a silent scream. The real Nyasha, or what remained of her, pounding against the glass from the other side. The girl smiled faintly and whispered to her reflection, Shoo. You had your time. The reflection wept harder. And then, like a wave of wind, the mirror cracked down the middle. The uncle stepped back in horror, but the girl turned to him, her face calm. Sometimes, she said, the dead only want to turn. He did not sleep that night. And by the next morning, Mama Oko was already preparing for war. Nyasha drifted in a place where time did not move. Here, the sky was neither dark nor light, just a vast, swirling dusk that wrapped around her like fog. She stood barefoot on water that didn't ripple, walked through forests of bone-white trees that whispered her name in hundreds of voices. And always, a girl walked ahead of her, her same back, same hair, same slow steps. No matter how fast Nyasha ran, the girl was always just out of reach. When she called out, her voice echoed and came back to her as a cry she didn't recognize. She wasn't dead. She knew that. She still dreamed. She still felt. But the world had forgotten how to see her. She screamed against glass walls, pounded fists against invisible ceilings. Sometimes she'd glimpse her old world through shattered holes, a bowl of water, a broken mirror, a boy's polished bracelet. And in every reflection, she saw herself. But she was never the one moving. Nuru was. Nuru, who now wore her skin like it had always belonged to her. Nuru, who painted her lips and wove gold into her braids, though Nyasha had always preferred the earth colors. Nuru, who laughed with boys and touched them without shame. Who stared too long, smiled too wide, and never blinked unless someone was watching. The villagers murmured, but not aloud. Not yet. They noticed when she stopped wearing the talisman Nyasha had always kept on her wrist. They noticed how she began to dance, not the shy, hesitant sway of a girl afraid of her own limbs, but the deep-hipped, bold movements of a woman who had watched desire from the other side. The boys followed her now like crows to fire. They offered fruits, song, even bracelets braided from their mother's hair. And she took them all, smiling, eyes never truly focused on them. As if she saw past them. Through them. Into the bones beneath their skin. Sometimes she wandered alone to the old graveyard, the one no one visited since the fever years. She'd sit among the tilted stones and hum lullabies to the dead. One elder swore he saw her press her ear to a grave mound, whisper something, and laugh as if she'd heard a reply. Then came the evening of the harvest festival. The villagers lit torches and painted their faces with clay and turmeric. Drums echoed across the hills, children danced barefoot in ash circles, and the air bloomed with roasted maize and mango wine. Everyone gathered in the square, dressed in their finest, even Nuru, still answering to Nyasha, who emerged in a shimmering red wrapper that clung like second skin. She didn't just dance. She devoured the drumbeat. Her hips struck like lightning, her eyes rolled back in ecstasy, her laughter cracked through the night like thunder wrapped in silk. People clapped and cheered, even those who feared her. Especially those who feared her. Then she stopped. Mid-dance. Mid-beat. Frozen. Her face shifted. And for the first time in weeks, the crowd fell completely silent. Her mouth opened slowly, and from it came a sound no one expected, a scream. Not of rage or wildness, but of terror. Raw. Childlike. Shaking. Her body trembled. Her hands rose, clawing at her own throat. Please, the voice cracked through her lips, unfamiliar yet eerily familiar, I'm still here. I never left. Then silence. Her limbs dropped. Her head turned toward Mama Oko, who stood in the shadows beside the musicians, unmoving. The girl blinked. Smiled. Bowed. And resumed dancing like nothing had happened. Later that night, Mama Oko returned to her hut, lit every candle she owned, and burned herbs until the walls sweated green. She placed a bowl of river water in the center of the room, sprinkled ash across its surface, and whispered, "If you are still in there, child, show me." The water remained still. Then, slowly, the ash spiraled inward. A face appeared. It was Nyasha's. But not the one dancing in the square. This face was pale, lips cracked, eyes wild with silent screaming. Mama Oko gasped and slapped the bowl away, water spraying across the floor like a scream unbottled. The next day, she visited the girl. She found her sitting beneath the fig tree, the same one where the grave had first rejected its occupant. She was humming and plucking the wings off a beetle, one by one. "What do you want?" Mama Oko asked. The girl smiled without looking up. "Want? No, Mama. I had all my wanting taken from me in the womb. You're not her. She never used what she had. Not like I do. I should have burned that body," Mama Oko muttered. "And yet you didn't." The girl looked up, and this time, her voice was not hers alone. It was layered, like a chorus hidden beneath a single throat. "You gave me a name before you sealed me. That was your first mistake." Mama Oko leaned in close, her blind eyes staring straight through her. "You won't keep her forever." The girl tilted her head. "No. But I will use her until I'm done." Mama Oko left with a trembling heart, but not before marking the trees around her hut with roots soaked in the blood of a still-living lamb. A week later, a little girl named Tandy came running into her mother's arms, crying. She held a crumpled drawing in her hands. "What is it, my child?" her mother asked, wiping her tears. Tandy didn't speak. She just pointed at the paper. Two girls. Identical. One stood smiling beneath the sun, dressed in red. The other crouched in a puddle of shadow, weeping, her hands pressed against a wall of glass. At the bottom, in childish scrawl, were the words. Two Nyashas. One smiles, one cries. The elders had exhausted their prayers, their herbs, and their patience. The crops continued to rot in their fields, livestock miscarried in silence, and the wind had begun to hum at night, a deep, steady murmur that crawled into dreams and refused to leave. Even the dogs, once loyal guards of the village, now slept with their backs to the huts, whimpering into the dust. It was Mama Oko who finally said the words no one else dared speak aloud. She must face the mirrors. A gasp followed, hushed and sharp. The mirror trial hadn't been performed in decades. Not since the spirit of a dead warrior had worn his widow's skin and danced at her son's naming ceremony. The elders argued. The spirit keeper protested. But the signs were too many. The girl's laughter still echoed at dawn. She had not blinked in 3 days. Something was inside her. Whether it wore her face or borrowed her memories no longer mattered. The truth would be found in the old way, through the 7 reflections. So they gathered at the river shrine, where the stone mirrors had been buried long ago. 7 slabs of obsidian, each one as tall as a man and etched with ancestral markings now covered in moss and roots. The villagers came in silence. No drums. No fires. Just footsteps and fear. The girl who called herself Nyasha walked among them, barefoot, head held high, wrapped in a white cloth that trailed behind her like fog. Her eyes shone in the morning sun, not with fear, but something colder. Hungrier. She didn't speak, didn't smile. She simply nodded as Mama Oko led her to the circle. The mirrors had been arranged in a crescent, each one facing inward. A path had been cleared between them, a straight line from the first to the 7th. Speak not, the spirit keeper warned, raising his staff. Do not look away. Do not touch the glass. Let the soul reveal itself. The girl stepped forward. The first mirror greeted her with warmth. A child appeared, 5 years old, smiling with missing teeth, braiding reeds on Mama Oko's porch. A moment of innocence. The villagers murmured. Perhaps it was her after all. She moved to the second mirror. The girl in this one stood still, until her skin began to peel. Muscles fell from bone, hair turned to ash, and in seconds, she was a skeleton, grinning, reaching forward, fingers tapping the glass from the inside. The villagers shifted. Some stepped back. The girl only blinked once, as if unimpressed. She walked to the third mirror. It shattered the instant she passed. No touch. No breath. Just silence. And then, crack. The glass split like it had been struck with fire. Shards rained to the ground, some still twitching. A mother screamed and dragged her child away. The elders looked to one another but said nothing. She did not pause. The fourth mirror was black. No reflection. Just darkness, pulsing faintly, like something breathing beneath the surface. The girl tilted her head. Then, oddly, she bowed, a small, mocking gesture, and moved on. The fifth mirror showed her standing in a burning field. Flames licked the edges of her dress, but she didn't burn. Instead, she laughed. A laugh no one in the village had heard before, until now. The villagers froze. That was her laugh. The one they'd heard in dreams, in wind, in the creaking wood at night. The same laugh. By the sixth mirror, the silence had become suffocating. As she approached, her reflection stepped forward to meet her. But behind the mirrored version of herself stood two shadows. They moved like dancers with broken spines, jerking and twitching with every breath. One reached out and touched her shoulder from behind. The real girl, or whoever wore her, flinched for the first time. Then she smiled again, too wide, and pressed her palm to the glass. The villagers had seen enough. Some fled. Others fell to their knees, weeping. Mama Oko stepped forward, steadying her cane. Her face was hard as stone. One mirror left, she said. The seventh mirror loomed, the oldest, etched with deep grooves like claw marks. This was the mirror that didn't just reflect. It revealed. The girl stepped up to it slowly. She stood still. So did the reflection. Then, without warning, the reflection turned. Not like a mirror echo. It turned on its own. It stepped away from her. And walked out of the glass. The villagers screamed. Some collapsed. The mirror didn't crack, it simply went empty, as if it had finished its duty. But what was worse came moments later. Mama Oko, still standing by the shrine's edge, gasped, not from fear, but from recognition. At that very moment, back in her hut on the other side of the village, the air shifted. The candles flickered and went still. The bowl of river water she'd set out that morning rippled, unprovoked. And then, footsteps. Not in the dirt. In the mirror. From within. A figure stepped through the glass hanging above her fireplace. It was Nyasha. Her real face, hollow-cheeked, bruised with sorrow, eyes glassy but full of fire. She was barefoot, soaked in mist, her fingers trembling. She opened her mouth. And wept. Not like a child. Not like a ghost. She wept like someone who had been caged in silence, beaten by the inside of another's skin, and now stood free for just a breath. Mama Oko crossed the room and caught her before she collapsed. Nyasha clung to her, sobbing into the folds of the old woman's robe. I saw it, she choked. She's using me. She's still inside. Mama Oko placed her hand over Nyasha's heart and felt a second beat. Far beneath the first. She didn't leave, Nyasha whispered. She let the reflection walk, but she kept my body. Outside, the village burned fires for protection. But they were far too late. The girl still standing in the mirror circle looked at the seventh mirror with calm satisfaction. She turned slowly to the elders, bowed once more, and spoke. I have passed. I am hers. And she is mine. The rains came early that season, not gentle like blessings, but fierce, like mourning. Thunder crawled across the sky like old bones, and the clouds pressed low against Mbalua's rooftops, whispering secrets no one dared understand. Mama Oko, hunched beneath her dripping shawl, stared into the storm with eyes that saw far more than blindness allowed. The village had reached its edge. The crops were dying, children woke screaming, and the girl who wore Nyasha's face had begun speaking to the wind in forgotten tongues. But something had changed. Nuru, bold, predatory Nuru, had begun to falter. At first, it was small. She'd forget a name. Stumble during a dance. Her hands trembled after drinking river water, and birds began to perch just above her and stare, heads cocked, eyes like polished beads. Then came the silence. Long pauses between her words, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. As if Nyasha's soul was speaking through the cracks in her stolen shell. And it was. Nyasha had begun to push back. In the twilight realm, between the veil of breath and bone, she screamed herself awake inside dreams that weren't hers. She clawed through reflections, through old songs, through memories that slipped like fish from her grasp. One night, as lightning split the clouds above, she reached Mama Oko through fire. The old woman had lit her herbs in a clay pot, preparing a quiet prayer, when the flames bent sideways. The smoke curled into the shape of two eyes, wide with pain. The fire hissed in a voice that wasn't air, she's pulling me down. And then it vanished. Mama Oko sat up through the storm, heart pounding, lips whispering a song she hadn't dared sing in years. The undoing song. A ritual whispered from the days before Mbalua had walls. It was dangerous, not only because of its toll, but because it offered no promise of return. The song didn't force a spirit to release. It asked. And if the spirit refused, the living soul could be lost, forever. The next day, the signs came. Nyasha's spirit bled symbols across the village, ash shapes in cooking fires, ripples forming eyes in puddles, her name appearing briefly in the steam of water pots. Nuru blinked more often. Her steps slowed. Once, she passed a mirror and gasped, because her reflection wasn't hers anymore. It stood still while she walked away. The storm returned on the seventh night. Mama Oko saw her moment. She gathered herbs soaked in moonlight, plucked from graveside roots and woven with red string. She called on winds older than names and painted her hut with the crushed ashes of unborn figs. Then she lit a single flame and summoned both girls, the living and the stolen. They came. Nyasha in spirit, pale and flickering at the threshold like mist. Nuru in flesh, her skin damp from rain, her smile brittle as broken teeth. They stood by the ancestral pool, where the first midwives had once sung babies into the world. The water churned with wind, shining like glass broken by thunder. Mama Oko raised her arms and began to sing. The undoing song was not sweet. It was raw and wild, full of cracked vowels and throaty calls. It told of wombs torn by choice, of names given and stolen, of sisters cursed to share one shadow. It echoed across the rocks, through the trees, through the sky itself. The ground shivered. Nuru staggered. Nyasha's spirit began to glow. The pool reflected both of them, one real, one taken. One mouth screamed in silence. The other lips began to move, trembling. Then Nuru collapsed to her knees. She covered her ears, shaking violently, screaming into the wind. No, she shrieked. She had everything, and gave it up. I only took what was wasted. The storm flashed. Mama Oko's song grew louder. Nyasha stepped closer, her spirit form solidifying with every word, every note. Her voice joined the song now, a harmony thin and cracking but real. Nuru lifted her face, tears carving paths through the clay on her cheeks. You want your life back? She hissed. Then take it. For a breath, the rain stopped. Time froze. And Nuru reached out her hand. But not to give. To pull. She lunged at Nyasha, and both girls plunged into the ancestral pool. The water exploded upward like a scream released. Mama Oko rushed to the edge, peering in, calling their names, but no answer came. Under the surface, the storm was silent. Two bodies spiraled. Two mouths open. Two sets of eyes, one terrified, one enraged. Nuru's grip tightened around Nyasha's wrist, dragging her downward into the realm she had fled, a world of red roots and sleeping bones. But Nyasha fought back. Her spirit flared. She wasn't just resisting. She was remembering. Her mother's song. Mama Oko's hands. The first time she'd tasted honey. The time she bled for a wound she didn't cause. She screamed it all into the water. And then... light. A flash brighter than any lightning. Mama Oko stepped back as the pool stilled. Completely. For a moment, there was nothing. Then... a girl emerged. Soaked. Gasping. Her hands trembled. Her lips moved. Her eyes blinked. She fell into Mama Oko's arms. Alive. But which one? Mama Oko pressed her hand to the girl's chest. One heartbeat. One breath. Then the girl whispered, barely audible through chattering teeth. She didn't let go. And from the still surface of the water, a single ripple moved outward. As if something else had stayed behind, watching, waiting. Or following. Midnight. The sacred hour, when the spirit world and the living brushed fingers across the veil. The ancestral pool lay silent beneath the full moon, its surface silver and still, too still, like it was waiting to swallow something whole. Around it, Mama Oko had redrawn the sevenfold spiral in ash, river chalk, and the blood of her own hand. Symbols surrounded the pool, spirals of rebirth, the eye of truth, the twin sigil crossed with thorns. She stood at the edge, staff in one hand, a burning herb braid in the other, lips murmuring words older than Balua itself. Across from her, the girl stood barefoot in the dirt, watching. She wore Nyasha's skin. She spoke in Nyasha's voice. But her posture was too still, her eyes too empty, her breath too slow, as though her lungs weren't used to pulling air anymore. You know why you're here, Mama Oko said softly. I never asked to be born last, the girl replied. She came first. They named me after light and threw me in the dark. It was never her fault. It was never mine either. A gust of wind blew through the trees, making the flames flicker. The pool rippled, though no stone had touched it. Mama Oko stepped forward. The bond must be broken. Or neither of you will survive. The girl tilted her head. But I'm not done living. And then, with no warning, she lunged. Her body twisted unnaturally fast, striking Mama Oko with force that defied flesh. The old woman staggered, thrown backward into the dust, her staff clattering to the ground. Before she could recover, the girl screamed, a piercing, layered cry that split the air and sent crows flapping from distant trees. The sacred symbols around the pool flared to life, burning blue, then gold, then red. And from within the girl's chest, something flickered. A second presence. Nyasha. Inside the shared body, she fought like a storm, her soul pressing against her sister's stolen grip. She clawed through muscle and memory, through shadow and song. She screamed into the bones of her own jaw, "Let me out!" And then, the water rose. Not with a splash, not with a tide, it rose as if lifted by invisible hands, climbing up the air in a column of glowing mist. The villagers arrived just then, drawn by the scream and the fire in the sky. They came with torches and chants, mothers clutching children, the spirit keeper clutching sacred beads, voices trembling. They gasped at what they saw. The girl hovering just above the pool, limbs arched backward, eyes wide open, mouth agape in a silent cry. In the water, reaching for her. Mama Oko struggled to her feet and shouted over the wind, "Call the names." Both of them. The villagers, unsure, uncertain, began to chant. Nyasha. Nuru. Nyasha. Nuru. The names rang like war drums. From the pool, pale hands reached up. Not real hands, spirit hands. Dozens of them, ancestors long buried. They gripped the girl's ankles, wrists, shoulders, pulling her downward, into memory, into truth. And in that moment, her body split. Not physically, not visibly, but in essence. Two souls, one clinging, one breaking free. Nuru screamed. The light erupted. A blinding flash, white and gold and red, like a sun being born underwater. The chanting stopped. The wind died. And the girl fell into the pool. A splash, then stillness. Everyone froze. The water rippled. Seconds passed. Then a minute. No one moved. Then, a gasp. A hand broke the surface. A girl pulled herself up onto the bank, soaked and trembling. Her body shook violently, chest heaving as she coughed up water and blood. Her eyes were squeezed shut. Her fingers clawed into the soil like it was the only thing real. The villagers rushed forward but stopped just short. Mama Oko stepped close, kneeling beside the girl, touching her wet hair. The girl opened her eyes. Dark. Wide. Familiar. But no one spoke. The silence stretched. And stretched. Then the girl looked up and whispered one word. Home. It was Nyasha's voice. But quieter. As if spoken from far away. Mama Oko hesitated. What is your name, child? The girl looked down at her hands. She stared at them for a long time, as if seeing them for the first time, or mourning something they used to be. Then she whispered, I don't remember. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The spirit keeper dropped his beads. The torches flickered again, casting two shadows behind her, one slightly smaller, slightly darker, reaching for the other. The girl looked toward the water, eyes glazed with tears. A single ripple moved across the surface. Then stillness again. She was back. But no one could say who had returned. Not yet. And from deep beneath the sacred waters, something else still waited, quiet, watching, remembering. She walked differently now, softly, like her feet remembered drowning. In Balua, they called her the breathless girl. Not because she didn't breathe, she did, but each inhale seemed borrowed. As if she were still deciding whether she belonged here. She wore Nyasha's face. Her skin bore the same curve, the same small scar near the brow, the same dimples that appeared when she smiled, though she rarely did. Her hair remained tied with Mama Oko's red thread, her clothes clean and simple. But it was her silence that unsettled the village most. She no longer asked questions. She no longer laughed. And though she was kind, always kind, she never spoke of the night at the ancestral pool. Children followed her at a distance, drawn by something they couldn't name. They said she could find lost goats just by listening to the wind. That flowers opened faster when she passed. That no insects ever crawled across her path. But mostly, they whispered about her shadow. It wept. Only at dusk, when the sun fell low enough to stretch it far across the dirt. The children would swear, with wide, unblinking eyes, that her shadow moved differently from her body. That sometimes it reached for the sky while she looked down. That it covered its face with its hands. That once, just once, it turned to look back at them, and its eyes were full of tears. Still, the girl lived quietly. She swept the shrine. She lit candles. She watered the earth around the sealed ancestral pool, now covered with a slab of black stone and encircled with salt and iron. No one went near it. The plants around it refused to grow. And then, a week later, Mama Oko died. She was found at dawn, curled in her mat like a child, mouth slightly open, skin peaceful. But in her hand were 2 feathers. Not white like doves, not brown like hawks. Black. Deep black. From no bird that flew above Mbulua. The feathers were laid beside her in the grave. No one asked why. Some things were better left unanswered. After that, the whispers grew. The girl had begun to hum. Not all the time, only in the mornings, or when alone by the river. Sweet songs, soft songs. But with 2 voices. One high, tremulous, the voice of a child. The other deeper, steadier, like someone remembering a song they had not sung in a long time. Villagers crossed themselves when they heard it. Elders muttered prayers. The spirit keeper, now gaunt and shaking, refused to ever meet her eyes. She carries both, he said once, barely audible. 2 hands inside 1 glove. They tried to forget. Time passed. Seasons changed. Crops returned. And still, the girl walked Mbulua with calm steps and downcast eyes. Until one day, she entered Mama Oko's abandoned hut. The villagers saw her open the old wooden door, step inside, and close it behind her. She stayed there for hours. When she came out, her face was pale. She walked to the river, carrying a broken mirror. And she sat. The glass shimmered in her hands. The current whispered. And slowly, the girl raised the mirror to her face. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then her reflection blinked. Before she did, the girl flinched. Her lips parted. The reflection smiled. And the girl hesitated, then tried to match it. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. Then, without warning, the reflection stepped back. Not physically. Not visibly. But something shifted. In the glass, Nyasha turned and began to walk away, into the misted background of the mirror, into a world no longer hers. She walked slowly, barefoot, peaceful. She did not look back. The girl gasped. Her hand trembled. Nyasha, she whispered, voice dry from silence. But the reflection was already fading. And what remained? The girl's face. Still the same. Still hers. But now, unmistakably, hers alone. Nuru. The breathless girl stared into her reflection, her own face now fully present, unmixed. And for the first time in the waking world, she said aloud. She left me here. Her voice echoed like a prayer dropped into a well. She set down the mirror. Folded her hands in her lap. And smiled. But behind her, her shadow stood motionless, its face covered, its head bowed, weeping.